All right. Next on the agenda is a segment that I know everyone's been anticipating and waiting for. We have Yvonne Hall from DEP to give us a update on the Clean Water Fund.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning. I will try to keep it short because I know that we're nearing the end of the morning and you guys are probably hungry, so just to let you guys know, there was another person from the department, Lori Salabai, that was advertised as also participating in this conversation. Unfortunately, she had a scheduling conflict, but maybe she can come to a future session. So just a quick agenda about what I want to speak about. First thing is a staffing update, and then I'm going to talk about the priority list for the Clean Water Fund and tell you where that sits. Talk a little bit more about outreach. We're trying to do more and more outreach because obviously if you guys don't have funding for your projects, you can't do anything. So I know this is really important. And then I'll talk about a couple of things specific to policy. So the first thing is that, where's Nana? Nana, can you stand up? This is Nana Jay. Welcome. Yep. Nana is our newest hire in the municipal wastewater group. He is an environmental analyst, and he just started. He is replacing Susan Unger, otherwise known as Lex, even though she's irreplaceable, but we have Nana, and he's great. And so if you get any emails or phone calls about MORs, you might see him on an inspection with Craig and Chris Chaber, just so that you know that, hey, he's part of DEEP and he works for us. And his background, he has very extensive municipal experience, so this is a switch for him to the regulator. He's worked for the cities of Toronto, Brockville, and most recently, the city of Hartford. So let's talk about the Clean Water Fund for those of you that don't know, and I know that a lot of you may know this, a lot of you may be new to this, but as a refresher, the Clean Water Fund will fund municipal wastewater projects, improvement projects, anything from combined sewer overflow projects, like sewer separation projects, adding nutrient removal, nitrogen and phosphorus at your treatment plant, sewer extensions to help pollution, to fix a pollution problem. We do funding for large-scale septic system upgrades. We fund green infrastructure projects, and EPA has a pretty broad definition of what they consider to be green, but this includes energy efficiency, as well as, infiltration projects that promote infiltration in a system. You can use that in combination with a sewer separation project. We also fund pump station upgrades, as well as resiliency projects that help to address flooding. So the Clean Water Fund funds planning, design, construction, all the way through a project, and we offer grant and loan, and I know that other states don't offer grants, so we have a very generous fund. So it's important to make sure that when you have a project that you're maintaining your eligibility, because if you don't keep your eligibility, you're in danger of not receiving clean water funding. So I came to this group in May. I'm not sure who was here in May, but I brought with me Kimberly Cianci. She is a fiscal manager that works at DEEP, and she is the one that's responsible for handling Clean Water Fund applications and agreements. This is one of the slides that we presented, so just a reminder for people, before you hire any consultant to work on your Clean Water Fund project, please use qualifications-based selection. Use QBS. If you don't, if you just hire them without this process, your project is no longer eligible. Another important thing to remember is getting deep approvals prior to work, completing facilities planning. You have to follow Clean Water Fund design requirements in order to get approval to go out to bid, but I'm going to focus specifically on the priority list today. So you have to submit a project proposal to be considered for the priority list. Now, I wish that I had the draft out on the street. I was hoping to have that in time for this meeting, but it's very, very close. So we put out what we call the call for projects, I believe in November last year. And so, we spent that time going through the project proposals that you all submitted, and that is different from a Clean Water Fund application, just so that because a lot of times people mix that up. But that project proposal gives us really important information that we need in order to develop the priority list, because obviously there's a lot of need out there, and even though we do have good funding of our Clean Water Fund in Connecticut, it's never enough. And so the priority list in Connecticut, there's 3 ways to qualify. So everybody thinks of the priority list, they're usually thinking about the fundable construction list. So that's a list of all the projects that we intend to fund over the next 2-year cycle. Those are scored with priority points. We also have category projects, which I'll explain in a minute, which allow project to go to the front of the line even above the highest scored project. And then for planning and design, as well as other low-scoring construction projects, we have we have a lot of reserves, and so I'll walk through that. The different categories, category 1, 2, and 3. Category 1 is usually the category that we see, and this is where you have a project that sits on the current priority list. So right now, we're still working under the FY24-25 priority list, even though we're in FY26. Usually, we don't have that new priority list ready right when you have a new fiscal year. That's because we're waiting for the state budget to get approved and, other factors. But while we're waiting to get that new list approved, we're always still working under the old list. So there are a couple of projects, on the current priority list that haven't gone to agreement yet, but we know that they're proceeding. They've submitted an application. Those are considered category 1 projects. And so when we develop the priority list, we have to put those ahead of all the other projects, make sure that we maintain our commitment to fund that. The priority point system is based in our regulations. Our regulations are very specific about how we have to score the projects, and it's all based on water quality. Projects that are going to help to meet water quality standards, combined sewer overflows, removing or reducing those, phosphorus removal, nitrogen removal, and this is an important caveat, meet the Long Island Sound goal for nitrogen removal. So there were a lot of nitrogen removal projects that have happened over the past 20 years where you might have had a project completed at your treatment plant where you received nitrogen points in order to, reduce how much you pay into the nitrogen credit program. So if you have a project for nitrogen removal that already received nitrogen points on the priority list in the past, if you have a new project where you're maybe fine-tuning your nitrogen removal, you're not going to get those points again. You get them with the first project. Also, if you are selling credits, you are technically, your treatment plant is meeting the goal for Long Island Sound, your part, and so we would not consider that project to be eligible for nitrogen points. And then, if you have a project that's serving a larger population of people, that's going to score you more points. And so other projects that, while they're important, aren't going to score as high, specifically failing septic systems, try to tell people, because we receive phone calls, we do not give money directly to homeowners. The Clean Water Fund is funding that is passed only to municipalities. So while a municipality can certainly package up a project where they have a lot of failing septic systems and they want to extend sewer, that's great. And then we'll find a way through a funding reserve to make that happen, but it's usually not going to score high enough to get on that fundable construction list. So the reserves, this is how we balance the playing field. Obviously, we don't want just the big communities that score a lot of points to get all of the funding. We recognize that there are other priorities, and I know that we've talked a lot about II removal today. Very important. I mean, is removing II actually going to result in a benefit, direct benefit to water quality? No. And so we want to make sure that we reach that project because we know it's not going to score points. And that's why we have the II reserve. We have been funding it with 20% grant recently, which, very important, please use that II reserve. In the past, it's only been loan only, and I expect that the upcoming priority list is going to keep that 20% grant. So please talk to us if you have an II project that you want funding for. So, we've been busy developing the FY 26-27 priority list. We are finalizing it with the commissioner. I hope, fingers crossed, that the public notice will go out before Thanksgiving. And so after that, as part of the notice, we'll tell you when the public hearing is. It'll be virtual. It used to be in person, but now we offer them virtually. But, if you have comments on the draft that we put out, you can submit written comments. You can show up to the virtual public hearing and, put something into the record that way. Either way, and then we compile all the comments. We take a look at the priority list, see what we feel deserves to be modified based on the comments, and then we finalize it. We prepare a hearing examiner's report, and then the commissioner will finalize that. So you guys are probably wondering, you may have heard that federal government is shut down, not too important, right? Well, of course, it's very important, and federal funding definitely impacts DEEP. I think about a third of our staff is funded through federal grants, so this is a big deal. Good news is that we already received funding for FY26 from EPA, and you would have never thought in the past that, there was the possibility that money could be clawed back. Well, with this administration, can't really say that anything's off the table, but how does it impact the Clean Water Fund? And even though it impacts DEEP staffing, the good news is that the Connecticut Clean Water Fund is very well funded by the state, that we don't have to rely too much on what EPA gives us, and so that's really good news for the Clean Water Fund. And I'll just show you, how the Clean Water Fund is doing, the sources of money. This is how we determine which projects to fund. So for FY26, we received $53 million in grant. Now, in the past, we've only received something called a base capitalization grant, and usually it's been about $18-19 million, except for a few years ago, started getting earmarks taken out so that it was more like 9 or 10, and those earmarks were going for congressionally directed projects, which I know some of the communities have taken advantage of. Well, when you take away the money, from us, yes, there is an impact, but not as much to our state as other states. With the passage of IJA, we are still receiving a supplemental grant, and we received just over $30 million for FY26, as well as an emerging contaminants grant. That grant is been given to us at the same level that we have received for the past couple of years, $2.6 million. That emerging contaminants grant is funding a pilot project at the Hartford landfill where we are going to be testing PFAS removal technologies. So that's a great project that is able to fund. And then we also have something that's not really part of the Clean Water Fund or State Revolving Fund, but it's another grant that's available to us. It's called the Stormwater and Sewer Overflow Grant, otherwise known as OSG. And that's just under $1 million. And we've been able to use that because it has less strings attached to it, including the ability to fund private work. We're using it to fund private lateral work in North Hartford because of the public health emergency that was publicized, a couple of years ago. It was all over the news how a lot of basement backups kept happening, and so we felt like that was a good use of that fund. But the majority of the Clean Water Fund for this fiscal cycle is coming from the state. So for FY26, we have been authorized to receive $180 million, and for FY27, $675 million. So just to break it down, the general obligation bonds, that is what directly funds the grants for the Clean Water Fund. We're able to receive $130 million for FY26 and $175 million for FY27. The state revenue bonds directly fund our loans, the low interest 2% 20-year loans that you're able to receive for work. That $50 million has been authorized of the state revenue bonds for FY26 and $500 million for FY27. So we're very fortunate because past couple of years, that funding was a lot less. We didn't get any revenue bonds. We only got about $100 million authorized for general obligation bonds across the 2 years. So this is really great. Is it just to put a finer point on how much of an impact federal funding being cut would have on our Clean Water Fund? This is a pie with all of those funding sources that I just talked about. The ones that are in color are federal grants. That's the $53.1 million in federal grants. That's 30% of the overall pie, if you will, for FY26. So if we lost that, it would be an impact, but we've received the money, and so that's good news. But if for FY27, IJA and the SRF were cut from federal funding, it would be even less significant because we're going to be receiving more state money than for FY26. So, if that were cut, the impact would not be as significant, which is important. So the Clean Water Fund is admittedly, IJA, for those of you that don't know, the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, otherwise known as BILL. We aren't supposed to call it BILL anymore, but that was the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed under President Biden, and now it's, supposed to be discussed as IJA, so that's what that is. So the Clean Water Fund is, got a lot of rules, and we know that it's a pain to follow, and it's difficult for people to know what to do, and so that's why we're very fortunate we come to these CTWE events as often as we can because we want to talk to you guys. We want to try to do a better job getting the word out. I mean, you could call us anytime to set up a meeting in person, virtually, but we're also going to be offering something new in January that we'll pilot. Save the date for January 6, 2026. 1 p.m., we will be sending something out where we're going to try virtual office hours. So this will be an opportunity for municipal officials to drop in and hear about specific topics that we want to highlight and ask questions and figure out, like, what to do with their project, and then we could set something up to, after that, to go over your specific project. But it's just another way that we want to make it easy for everybody to understand the rules of our program. If you have a project that's already, in design and you're getting ready to go to construction, but you're not yet there, you're thinking about the Clean Water Fund application, you want to know what to do, please don't hesitate to schedule a meeting with the engineers that work for me and the accountants that work on your project. We want to make sure that, again, everybody's understanding all the requirements that have to be submitted for an application. If you have a brand new planning project and you haven't talked to anybody yet, and you're like, hey, how do I fill out this Clean Water Fund application for a planning project? Schedule one of these pre-app meetings. Happy to do it, and I'm going to give you contact information. This is my contact information. It's my office number, my cell, my email. It's just yvonne.hall@ct.gov, Yvonne with an I. If you have general questions, you want to request a pre-app meeting, and you're not already in touch with a project engineer, use deep.cwf@ct.gov, and we'll get that set up for you. If you have that application, ready to go, you submit it to a different email box, and that one is deep.admincwf, all one word, no spaces or dashes, @ct.gov. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things that we wanted to highlight as far as policy things that we think are important for everybody to know, and payments and DEEP approvals. Now, we have new leadership in our fiscal office that's been trying really hard to tighten up, requirements, make sure that the program is running smoothly. And so there are, some of the things that maybe were a little bit lax, especially over COVID, we're trying to tighten up on. One of these is engineering agreements. Now, for those of you that work with the Clean Water Fund, you know that draft engineering agreements need to be approved by DEEP before you can execute it. Well, we also need to approve the executed version as well. So we approve the draft, you get the approval letter, then we get the executed version. We take a look at that, make sure it hasn't changed from the draft, then we have to approve that again. I know it's a lot of extra paperwork. Unfortunately, the regulations require that we approve the draft, and of course, we want to make sure that nothing has changed from what we approved, and that's why we need the other one. If you have not submitted that engineering agreement to us that's been executed, and you're going to submit, a pay rec for work under that agreement, you have to make sure that that executed engineering agreement has been also approved by DEEP. If you have a delay where you're not sure how long it's going to take to get that executed version, because we know that in your different towns, there might be a delay, just talk to us so that we know about it. But don't expect that you will be able to receive payment reimbursement if you haven't gotten that approval of the executed engineering agreement. Same thing, with change orders. We require DEEP approval of change orders Draft has to be approved if it's greater than $100,000. The second thing that I wanted to highlight, we have new Davis-Bacon forms. If you don't use the new Davis-Bacon forms, you're not going to get paid. And so we have a table back there. Apologize that it doesn't have deep logo on it, but it's the left-hand table right back there in the center back of the room. Grab one of the Davis-Bacon forms if you haven't seen it already. We also have a bunch of other handouts that we want you to look at. Please use the correct Davis-Bacon form. The second thing we wanted to talk about today, and this is what Lori was going to talk about, I am not an expert on this particular topic, so, if I don't get something 100% correct, I'm going to refer you to the right people that can give you the answers. Contractors that work on state-funded projects like the Clean Water Fund have to be pre-qualified through DAS, and most of you know this. Many of our Clean Water Fund projects, whether it's a sewer project, a treatment plant project, a pump station, you have the potential for encountering contaminated soils, including PCBs. We all know this. This is like, what's your point, Yvonne? There has been a recent reinterpretation of this Connecticut General Statute, which I'm going to read for you, 22A 454A. No person shall engage in the business of acting as a contractor to contain or remove or otherwise mitigate the effects of a discharge, spillage, uncontrolled loss, seepage, or filtration of such substance or material or waste without a permit from the commissioner. Now, I think people have good awareness that you need to have, so this is known as 454. I think people have good awareness that they need to have a transporter that holds a deep license for 454 if you have a certain type of contaminated material. What you may not be aware is if the person that is actually doing the excavation of those soils also needs a permit for 454. The following activities require a contractor to hold an individual permit. Anything that's subject to the release reporting regulations, underground storage tank regulations, CERCLA, EPCRA, releases that, or materials that contain PCB levels greater than 10 ppm. This is probably the one that most applies to this group of projects, because I know that the treatment plant projects that I worked on, there was always something about PCBs. And also releases to a surface water or groundwater, that requires an individual permit. So in order to get this individual permit, it does take about 6 months to get that permit from DEEP. And so the contractors that typically work on Clean Water Fund projects, they might not hold this 454 license. And so this is from the regulations of the Connecticut state agencies. What constitutes a release? A release means not just an active release of a liquid or a chemical, it also applies to past contamination that's found. And so that's the key. In order to mitigate the situation that's caused by making this a new requirement for remediation projects, there is a general permit that hopefully is going to be finalized. I heard it was supposed to be finalized this week. Hopefully within the next few days. Maybe it's being finalized right now, I don't know. A general permit is going to allow the contractors that work on Clean Water Fund projects where they're excavating soils to register under a general permit instead of needing to get this individual permit. So if there is a remediation project that's, say, enrolled in a Brownsfield program, or CERCLA. Any of the conditions here being investigated or remediated in a site-wide voluntary program, the Transfer Act, RCRA Corrective Action Program, Urban Sites Remedial Action Program, anything that's being investigated, remediated, or mitigated pursuant to significant environmental hazard requirements, or anything after the effective date of the release-based cleanup regulations, which will become effective in February, are subject to the requirements of the release-based cleanup regulations. And as part of that list too, we are adding these Clean Water Fund projects. They are going to be eligible to get this general permit as well. The following activities are not eligible for the 454 general permit. Really, the most significant one here is if you have contaminated material containing PCBs that are greater than 10 parts per million, or from a release from a source that is regulated under TSCA, which means basically that you don't know the source. The source is unknown. That's what makes it regulated under TSCA. And again, I'm not an LEP, so, please talk to your LEP. Then these types of projects or releases to surface water or groundwater, if you have this type of condition, you are not eligible for coverage under the general permit. So how do you implement this new 454 requirement into your Clean Water Fund project? Once the 454 general permit is issued, DEEP recommends that all Clean Water Fund contractors register under the general permit in the same way that a project registers under the DEEP construction stormwater general permit. The difference is this general permit is contractor specific and it's not project specific. So you don't do it for every project. It means like Nickerson, somebody like that that's doing work, they're going to have to get the general permit and coverage. And the good news is that we're making it as simple as we can. It's just a registration. It's not as onerous as the individual permit. The individual permit is something like $17,000 fee. This is $1,000 registration, and it's good for 2 years. There's no approval time. You just register, you'll receive an acknowledgement, but you don't have to wait for any approval. So, the general permit, for those of you that don't know or that you may have missed it, it was public noticed November of last year. If you have specific questions about the status of the 454 general permit, please contact DEEP Remediation Division. Their phone number 860-424-3705. DEEP will notify everybody that's signed up for the municipal wastewater email alert system once the general permit is finalized. If you are not registered, scan the QR code up there. That'll get you signed up for the alerts. We'll also notify CTWIA and have them help us spread the word that the general permit is out. But if you have a project where highly contaminated soils are found or expected, mainly the PCBs greater than 10 ppm, you need to have some type of contingency for a contractor that holds an individual permit for 454 to do the excavation of the contamination. If you have any questions about how do I make sure that my particular project, which might be in design right now or it's already under construction, do I have to worry about this for my particular project? We have to, evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. Contact your project engineer or contact me. email that, general email box. We will get you the answers. We'll sit down with you and we'll go over it to make sure that you're in compliance. For specific questions about the individual permit program, contact information is Lori Salaby. She's listed there. It's lori.saliby@ct.gov. Gary Trombley, he's the assistant director. Ryan Santos. Please contact one of them. If you don't have their information and you forget to write this down, and just contact me and I'll get you hooked up with the right people. But bottom line, we want to make sure that your project doesn't run into any trouble. And so we know that we needed to put the word out about this. And there's probably going to be more information forthcoming in the next few months. So that was all that I had to discuss. Do you guys have any questions?